welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you. We've heard a lot of discussion today about how the U.S. federal government is pulling back. So I'm very excited to talk to you about local resilience, disaster preparation, and response to give us a little bit of a bright spot. So Shannon, if I could start with you, what does this look like for King County, both in fiscal and practical terms, when you have the federal government pulling back and a local jurisdiction trying to respond to that?
Thanks, Anna. Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and I'm really happy to see all of you here today. For King County, King County and Seattle, we're leaders in this climate work and in climate action, and in particular, climate justice. I was so happy to see Paulina Lopez on the agenda earlier. And the federal government, last year, we were able to do a 4-county collaboration and lead a grant application, and were awarded $50 million from the Biden administration to do work to decarbonize buildings across the 4 counties, particularly focused on low and moderate incomes and people who live in areas most impacted by climate impacts from airports, for example, things like that. So that kind of work is incredibly important. We know it's incredibly important. Right now, we're able to do that work. We have that money coming in, but we need more of that, not less of that. And we certainly are getting the impression from this administration we should expect less of that and not more. But what I would also stress is Seattle and King County are amazing partners. We know how to collaborate with each other and with the other 38 cities in the county and across the entire region. So I think we see opportunity to really build those partnerships. We have the King County Cities Climate Collaboration. It's called K4C. 87% of our cities participate in that. And I think we want to get that up to 100, right? And so there's work to do, but I think we see opportunity. We are a real leader in that space. We need to continue to be a leader in that space as a local government, and we're going to keep doing that.
And I should also say, if the audience has questions, you can scan a QR code somewhere to submit questions, and I'll try to get some of those in as well. Jessyn, you previously led Seattle's Office of Sustainability and the Environment, so I thought you might be a good person to talk about how local jurisdictions are better positioned for certain climate initiatives. Can you tell us a little bit about transportation and building codes and the things that local jurisdictions can actually do better than the federal government?
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to be here. Yeah, I think a couple of things that are really important. I've been working on environmental issues for 20 years, and for most of that time, the federal government has not been a huge player. And so we had this brief, wonderful moment for 3 years while we had access to the federal government as a partner, and we want that, and it was great because the feds can scale in a way that local jurisdictions in the state just can't. But at the end of the day, that's mostly what we've been working with. The feds have not been huge partners, and cities actually have the ability to do a ton of decarbonization in our land use and in transportation. There's a ton of carbon that's baked into our land use and transportation policies. And so we're really well positioned to decarbonize on the one hand and at the same time make cities an even better place to live. So I can talk a little bit about our building emissions performance standard. BEPS is the very sweet little name that we call that regulation. But that's an example where we were actually able, I like to say we got both DSAs in our community to generally get into the same neighborhood on a policy. So the Downtown Seattle Association and the Democratic Socialists usually are not in the same room talking to each other. And we were really able to get people into a general place of consensus. I don't want to say that we resolved every issue and that everyone was a cheerleader, but ultimately, by really focusing on the tangible benefits that these policies bring to people in our community, you get more comfortable buildings. So when it's hot like this, you can be in an air-conditioned and air-cooled space. If you are a union member, you get access to a great-paying job. And we created the policy in a way that people with big asset portfolios had lots of time, have lots of time to be able to implement and pivot. It's a 25-year program. So that is an example where at the local level, I really think we're doing it right and bringing people together through climate policy.
It's so funny. When you said the 2 DSAs, I knew exactly what you were talking about. I think it's important to have policies that also have a business case,
Yeah.
that provide those incentives. It's not just about doing good, but it's also about doing well and, providing that incentive for people at the local level. Shannon, we've talked about resilience, but I also want to talk about disaster response. Here in King County, late last year, we had the bomb cyclone, which was basically like a big thunderstorm, but it was hugely destructive.
It was.
Homes were destroyed. We didn't have power for 4 days. What has the back and forth been like with the Trump administration that's different than how it usually works?
Well, our Office of Emergency Management they've applied for disaster funding from the federal government and been denied twice. The storm was about $34 million in damage, which by natural disaster standards is relatively small. But when you think about it from that community space, it's huge. And for local governments, it's a large amount of money, right? So then you look at larger natural disasters and you understand why it's so important for the federal government to be engaged at the very least at a resourcing level. We can work together. We have arrangements with partner counties, partner cities. We all work together and there are arrangements made for if there's a natural disaster, we will, of course, collaborate in those spaces. But I think the other thing we're really trying to work to do is how do we prevent those natural disasters from happening? And so we are working on our wildfire action plan, our climate director for another thing, I really need to give credit to my predecessor, Dow Constantine, who was in this role for 16 years and was an incredible climate champion and created a climate office inside the executive's office so that it could really oversee all of this work across the enterprise. And our climate office director was a part of the Blue Ribbon Commission in LA and is bringing, after their wildfire disaster, is bringing those lessons here so we can learn from that. We also, we have zoning things in place so that we are creating the appropriate kind of zoning out in our more rural areas so that we are creating wildfire protection spaces and working to try to prevent some of those kinds of things. Again, it's all, it's big bodies of work, but we know we've got the skills and resources.
That's so interesting because I remember, watching the fires in LA and thinking about what that would look like here in Washington State and King County. And unfortunately, it's a matter of when, not if.
That's right.
So that preparation and, kind of learning best practices from where it's already happened. So important. I believe we actually have a chart of disaster aid as percent of county GDP, if we could pull that up, so we can kind of illustrate this. We've seen several events in the past few months. Floods from Hurricane Helene in my home state of North Carolina, the fires in LA, these tragic floods in Texas, which of course were, sending all of our solidarity and support to the communities there. Shannon, I was going to ask you about how do you plan for the unthinkable, but there were a lot of people in these places who were thinking about the worst case scenarios. And how do you, what do you take from specifically the Texas floods? Do you see any similar vulnerabilities here in King County?
I mean, honestly, in that case, I don't see a lot because we wouldn't permit in that kind of a flood zone. That's the kind of, we have really strong permitting and protections in our conservation spaces, in our easement spaces. Now, we have places like Vashon Maury Island, like South Park, we have sea rise concerns. We're not, immune to those things, but we are very on the lookout for those kinds of things and trying
South Park,
to
where
prevent
Paulina
those.
Lopez,
Yes,
the community she was
yes.
talking about.
Yes, so we're not immune to that, but we do try to make sure we hold very strongly. There's a lot of tension in that space, right? Like, as you all know, growth management is a very challenging thing. People want to build cheaper housing. To do that, you'd have to get outside of a growth boundary and out of the urban growth boundary. That causes some other challenges and issues. And we really hold strong to protecting those areas because we know what that environmental protection means to protecting our climate and protecting those kind of disasters from happening.
And for protecting people. We have a poll, y'all are good at polls by this point, asking what kind of local investment would most improve climate resilience in your community. So if you can scan the code and vote on the poll. Jessyn, while they're doing that, I wanted to ask you about exactly this, this stricter permitting in this area and the tension that brings with the need for more housing. We have very high housing costs here. How do you balance the need to just build with stricter rules about how and where to build?
Yeah, I think, backing up, part of the case for cities is that they need to be great places for everybody to live, people who currently live there and people who want to live there. And the housing affordability crisis really makes that a challenge. I would say the other part of this is dense cities are more climate resilient cities. People who live in dense communities have a lower per capita carbon emissions, et cetera. At the same time, one of the big debates in Seattle is housing versus trees. So not only do we need more housing, but we need to protect our existing canopy and grow the next generation's canopy as well. So how the heck do you do that? On the permitting front, everyone talks about the abundance book. There's a lot to that, I will say. It had to come up. We're talking local government. It had to come up.
Yeah, go for it.
So, permitting-wise, yes, we need to do it faster. We need to be more transparent. It needs to be a lot simpler. And I will say I am, pro-progressive government, believe in regulation, and our regulations can absolutely get in the way of what we're trying to do. And so the mayor of Seattle has issued an executive order that is really directing us to go through our regulations with a fine-tooth comb and do this better and do permitting better. So that's one side of it. On the density versus tree side, I think the real way we unlock that ability to build more housing, protect trees, at the end of the day is going to be about flexibility on the lot. We have a lot of requirements on a particular lot. You need parking, you need places to store trash. You can only have, setback, all of these different things. And what happens is the trees end up getting cut down because all of these other things get the priority over a tree. So if you can create flexibility for developers on a particular lot, if you save a tree, you get flexibility. I think that's how we get to that place where we're able to have more density and save those big existing trees that we want and need in a climate resilient community.
And not build into more sensitive areas.
Yeah, and we've done urban heat mapping with the city of Seattle so that we can also understand where more trees are needed. And King County has a 3 million trees project to plant 3 million trees by the end of next year, and we are on track to do that. And so working with the city of Seattle, it helps us determine, where to put a bus shelter, how to make sure we're protecting trees that might be in those spaces. So we're working on that to try to be sure we can be a part of that, helping those dense urban areas maintain or build some of that tree canopy.
That's great. We do have an audience question about green streets and active transportation. Jessyn, I think this might be one that you can take.
Okay.
Tell us all about transportation and also how that fits into kind of the climate matrix and some things we talked about.
Okay, great question. Most of you know that, maybe some of you, maybe you don't know. I will tell you, transit is my love language. And so it's great to get to talk about that for a sec.
I love nerds. I love hanging out with them.
Yeah, I know. So nerdy. This is what everybody wants at 3:30 in the afternoon. So, I think the real issue for city streets is how do we make them work for people, right? Like at the end of the day, how do we make sure that we have low carbon options? They're safe for our kids. They're safe for elders. Some of us are going to drive. I have 3 kids. I definitely use my car to get my kids around. But at the end of the day, a really great, workable, dense city has really great options to get around. And the other thing I would say about this is with transportation being the #1 cause of emissions in the city of Seattle, with the feds pulling back from EV incentives, go get your EV incentive right now. Don't wait, run, don't walk. Is that we actually know how to reduce emissions from transportation right now. And that is to get out of our cars and use other ways of getting around. And I look at some people say, but it's too hard, people don't want to change. I'm going to use an example that is one of my favorite examples. University of Washington in the early 90s had 70% of people drive alone onto that campus. And a group of folks, a group of transportation planners, including my first boyfriend's dad, Mr. Davis, was part of that group that created the UPass program. And the UPass program basically said you'll get a free bus pass or a heavily subsidized bus pass. We're going to jack up parking pricing, and we're going to make transit amazing from all around the region. And within a couple of years, that mode shift flipped so that you had only 30% of people driving and 70% of people taking transit. And you can only imagine what amazing benefit that had for emissions. So it's just to say we actually know how to do this and we have the tools, and it makes a better city when we're creative and figure out these new things. So that's kind of my throwdown to everyone at the City of Seattle, at King County, and in this room. What is the next generation of UPass policies that help incentivize people make a change? Go get your EV at the same time, but let's also get out of our cars.
And there's some things we can do as individuals. But then there's also things that happen at a systemic level that allow us to make decisions as individuals that are better for the climate. Having those transit options, having those, the housing options is definitely part of that. Thank you both so much. It's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.